Sibling sins, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If you are listened to, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of two or three witnesses. If that person refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if my sibling sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, we are continuing to chronicle with our friend Peter as we move through the Wandering Heart series. We reflect on how Peter is a mirror to us of our own journey. At this point, Peter's journey with Jesus showcases the highs and lows of discipleship. We have read about him being chosen by Jesus, being praised by Jesus at the mountaintop when he rightly discerns who Jesus is. And last week, he was rebuked by Jesus for having things of the earth rather than things of heaven on his mind. What a mirror for us of our own highs and lows of walking with Jesus. Today, Jesus is teaching about how to live in community, and our friend Peter shows up again, eager and curious here about how to understand what Jesus is saying. Here we see Peter like a young child, eager to learn from his teacher, sitting at his teacher's feet, curious about what his words all mean. And so essentially, Peter is asking, teach me, Lord, how to be in community. At this point, Peter has been told that he is going to be the rock on which the church is built. And Peter is starting to feel like this is a huge responsibility. I don't even know what church means. I don't even know what community is. And surely when people gather together, there is the possibility of conflict. And so teach me how to be in relationship, he says. Teach me how to live in community. Teach me how to assemble the believers that you have placed under my feet. He returns to a very young desire. One of the first things that we learn as children, how to share our toys, how to apologize, how to say we are sorry, how to exercise manners, how to be people together. And so we admire Peter for his desire to learn. We are taken in this passage to an experience of community repair in Scripture. The reason I like this passage is because in it, Jesus expects that conflict and disagreement will come. He expects that our human capacity to commit harm to one another, to misunderstand one another, intentionally and unintentionally, is inevitable. And I kind of like that Jesus is honest with us about our nature. And in this passage, he gives us strategies, not necessarily as a universal step-by-step process, but strategies to emphasize the urgency of restoration in relationships and seeking wholeness as often as possible. God's desire is for each of our communities to experience emotional health, wholeness, and freedom. In Jesus's instructions, he encourages direct and honest communication among members, which is not letting things go, not attacking, gossiping, not passive aggressiveness or triangulation, bringing people in that aren't involved, going directly to the person who you have an issue with. And then Peter asks, how often should I forgive my sibling? If my brother or sister or sibling sins against me, should I forgive him only 7 times? And in some translations, it says 7 times 7. And in other translations, it says 70 times 7. Is it 49? Is it 490? Lord, let us know so we can count each one and stop precisely at that number. But I'm here to tell you that it does not matter. Because this equation is not about the equation at all. It is not at all about precise math, but it is about continuity. The number 7 representing wholeness and completeness, an abundance of forgiveness, a circular, ongoing forgiveness in action. And in this process, Jesus offers a way to address harm that is not fixated on punishment, very different than our punitive criminal justice systems that we live under, that often do not give people the opportunity to be rehabilitated or give them second chances. And so Jesus is offering us a way of engaging people and engaging offenses that is very countercultural. There are times, the passage acknowledges, when reconciliation cannot be achieved in this life. If this process does not work, Jesus gives us a way out, saying that the community has permission to release someone from the community when reconciliation cannot be achieved. And yet in scripture, the idea of allowing someone to exist outside of their community never means that they are outside the bounds of God's grace or possibility, that we do not believe in change. And so what is forgiveness really? Shanika Walker Barnes, a theologian and psychologist, says she defines it as an internal process that is expressed outwardly, rooted in releasing hostility and choosing to move forward. Forgiveness is how we release ourselves from bitterness and resentment that can end up eating us up on the inside, sometimes even turning into all types of health concerns. But it's important also to acknowledge what forgiveness is not, right? Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not ignoring abuse. It is not enabling. It is not refusing to enact consequences. It is not refusing to hold people accountable. It does not mean remaining in relationship with people who are harming us. It can involve changing a relationship, setting boundaries, or even ending a relationship. Forgiveness can still mean all of those things. Forgiveness is also not a one-time event. It is a repetitive, cyclical cycle. It is often something that we need to return to over and over and over again. 70 times 70 is infinite. We may need to do it many, many times for the same person, for the same offense. As often as you need to, the equation says to return and return again and again, as often as you need to, as often as you can. David White talks about forgiveness as heartache, recognizing how difficult it really is. The very act of trying to forgive, the very intention to try to forgive is in itself heartache. Because to do so, you are refusing to eliminate the original wound, but drawing closer and closer to it every time. The path to forgiveness can be painful, and it assumes a great deal of risk. It does not deny the damage that's been done, but looks forward, all while recognizing that once an offense has been done, something has been altered in oneself and in the relationship. The ease which we forgive will often depend on our personalities, our histories of trauma, the extent of the harm, the person doing the harm. And some things are harder to forgive than others. It's much easier to forgive someone who steps on your toe than something that happened years and years ago. But it's important to acknowledge that sometimes premature forgiveness can also do damage. Forgiveness must be freely given, not demanded or done out of obligation. Sometimes forgiveness is delayed for a while, and sometimes it never comes. I was reading a story recently in the Presbyterian Outlook about a pastor who had gotten into a situation with her friend where she had offended her friend and hurt her friend. And she apologized and asked for forgiveness, and the friend did not give it to her. The friend refused. And she wrote about the experience of having forgiveness denied and the process of understanding that God forgave her each week that she came to church and also had respect for her friend's process, that she has a right to go through her process and understanding that she could not see the inward work that God was doing in her, the transformation that still could be happening even if she couldn't see it. And I just thought it was such a beautiful, honest story about how forgiveness can be difficult, not only for the person who is doing the forgiving, but the person who is receiving or not receiving the forgiveness. What I love is that she respected her friend's process, gave her space, even as it hurt, to understand that that inward work is something that still needs to happen. Another thing that Shaniqua Walker Barnes talks about is the reality also of systemic harms and forgiveness and how that complicates our understanding of forgiveness. She said, I have repeatedly seen the powerful weaponize the instruction to forgive against the oppressed and abused. Black people being told to forgive the US for chattel slavery. Women being told to forgive husbands who have abused them. Survivors of violence told to forgive the church. And surely this is not the forgiveness that Jesus is asking us to do. During the 2020 uprisings, there was a post circulating on social media of a family that had forgiven a police officer for a shooting of their loved one. And while I do not doubt that that could happen, that that was genuine, it was actually a quite beautiful story. The story was being circulated as a public display used to shame those who were out protesting or experiencing anger or expressing their anger. And so using that story as a weapon, as if everybody needs to have this response, is surely not what Jesus is asking us to do. Forgiveness is not something that we can demand of others. It is not something that we can expect in all situations when people are living under structural oppression. When the issue is systemic or structural, these situations teach us not about personal forgiveness, but about community repair. Community repair often requires more than words and reflections and one-to-one dialogues. Community repair requires true accountability and restitution, not to individuals, but to communities. In those situations, land needs to be given back. Reparations need to be made. Communities need to be rebuilt. Resources need to be reallocated. In those situations, we're not advocating just for personal forgiveness, but systemic change, a changing of our behaviors and the way that we structure our society. This too is a part of holistic health and wholeness. And so as we think about Jesus's words about personal forgiveness and about systemic change, we recognize that as we work towards repair, we are participating in God's own nature. God's own nature is an abundance of mercy that never runs out. And that's why we have confession and an assurance every single week. Every single week, our confession is a little bit different, but the process of confessing is something we return to week after week because we need that assurance that forgiveness is 70 times 7. Infinity offered for us over and over again. Sometimes we are going to be able to replicate that, and sometimes it's going to be really difficult. But what Jesus is inviting us to do is a commitment to a forgiving disposition, to work towards and turn ourselves towards forgiveness as often as we need to, as often as we can, as often as we are able. Being forgiven by God does not release us from our responsibility to one another. We must work to apologize well, not necessarily, I'm sorry if I hurt you, or I'm sorry if you were offended. Real apologies, which is naming our wrongs, being able to explain why it hurt someone, being able to say sorry and then saying what we will do differently, being able to say sorry and then change our behavior. This is the kind of repair that is thorough and what Jesus cares about. That we might cultivate cultures of accountability, making amends, and giving second chances. That we might be a part of a society where we can advocate for systems that actually help people deal with trauma and the root of harm rather than punishment. And so again, returning always, as often as we need to, as often as we can, to a disposition that is always turned towards restoration. This is our invitation today. Amen. Now is your opportunity to share what you are thinking, how this message is bubbling up in you.
Real quick, this couldn't have come at a better time. As I shared before, my son is in this incredibly toxic relationship. And yesterday, my son and his partner showed up at a family party, which blew me away. I had to make sure my brother didn't say anything because it would have been bad. And from what I understand, his partner wants to try to make repairs to our relationship. And it's interesting, like when you say forgiveness is not forgetting. And I just need to like take a step back because I don't, it's going to take a lot, but I have to focus on my son and I have to make sure that he's happy. And so it was just, thank you. Good timing. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, grace to you and the difficulty of these conversations.
Yeah, forgiveness is not an easy thing. That passage, part of that passage that was always hard for me, even as a young child, was when he talked about going to somebody to tell them they were doing something wrong, and then going back and getting two more people to tell them they were wrong. And I always kept looking at the person who they were talking to and wondering, well, what if they weren't wrong? And all these people are coming at them. And it made me think about the church experiences that I've had where people have said things about somebody, or they've talked about the issues of gay people, and how two or three of the members of the church would want to go and tell that person to straighten up and and think about what they're doing in their life. So that passage has always been hard for me. And I've always prayed. I thought, Lord, just give me the wisdom to know what is right here. And I'm 84 years old and I don't have that wisdom yet. And I'm probably never going to have that wisdom. So I just have to sometimes mind my own business, pay attention to what I'm doing, and trying to keep healing the relationships that I have. And that's the best I can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up a good point because it also assumes that in that process, the community itself has to have good values, has to not be toxic, all of these things. Right. And so what is ideal is not always what's healthy either. If everybody is, not agreeing on you know, what even being a good person looks like, or being a good Christian looks like, or how to interpret scripture, it gets really messy. So there's a lot that is assumed for that to work well. Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on something that this passage and your interpretation of it reminded me of. Something that I am aware people have good intentions when they say, but I think is not a totally correct idea. A lot of people have this idea that in order to heal, you must forgive, especially after any sort of trauma you've experienced. You have to forgive or you'll never recover. And I think personally, while people are trying to be helpful because they want you to get better, that is such a damaging thing to say to someone, and such a, in a lot of cases, damaging belief to hold. Because sometimes a couple of things here or there are just not forgivable. But what I think is really important to do is to make sure, even if you're still hurt, even if you're still like disgusted, you make sure that it doesn't hurt other people. Like, I have one person that I will never forgive, and I never really tell people the reason, because it would require a lot of trigger warnings, and we got to keep people safe. We love our communities. But that is someone who, despite the fact that I'm very against the modern incarceration system because it has so many systemic flaws and disproportionately hurts people, he's in jail. I landed him in jail, and I have to make sure that my disgust towards this individual doesn't lead to thinking, oh, it's okay for a one specific prisoner to be treated horribly in these different ways. Because the thing is, it's never just one person. And even if you have that personal issue of forgiveness, it's making sure that it doesn't impact the wider community, and that you make sure it doesn't fall onto other people, because it will. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think those are all really good points. And I think you're right. I mean, working with trauma and things like that, I mean, we know that, expecting forgiveness or telling somebody that forgiveness is the only way for them to heal, really just exasperates the problem. There's other things that you can do, especially when you are being harmed by someone, to prioritize your own well-being first. Um, and so that's definitely an important point, is that it's a very, very individual process, not something that you prescribe to someone in order to move forward. So yeah.
I just wanted to kind of jump on what Theo said, that you have to forgive in order to heal. Um, I feel like with this day and age, it's very hard to forgive people today, because instead of the line of forgive and forget, people just want to flat out forget and try to gaslight you. And because I know I had my fair share of narcissistic people in my life that try to gaslight me. It's like, oh yeah, I never did that to you, or oh yeah, you're just over exaggerating, and then they just make you seem like you're crazy, or that you're just doing it out of hate or spite. But in reality, they just want you to forgive and force forgiveness for them to fill in that hole of guilt that they have, because they feel guilty themselves, but they don't want to show it, and they don't really care. So I feel like it's just really hard to forgive. And if you don't give them that forgiveness, they just like burn on the inside. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Seems like another way to use it as a weapon, right? Like when it's just for them. Yeah. Yeah, Peter.
Trying to figure out how to say it. I think I'm going to continue what Jaden has been saying. I was thinking that sometimes forgiveness can be used in such a way that it perpetuates the wrongdoing. And this is seen over and over again, I think, in domestic abuse, where the partner who is doing the abusing um, uh, uses the other partner's forgiveness as a way to continue the abuse, and with a temporary restraint, but not a full change of practice. And somehow or other, it seems to me that the person who does the forgiving has got to understand a lot about the nature of the abuse, the nature of the harm, whether that was comes out of a wounded psyche of the other, which means that forgiving the other is not going to change the behavior.
Right.
And I think that often systemically, people expect that as well. They expect the people who are being wrongly treated to accept the injustice and to act as if it's okay.
Right.
In order to give the other some fuel to continue the practice. And so that's why it's so very, very complicated. And I'm always a little disturbed, but no time too much.
That I was going to take this when you were.
Oh, that's where I've often been not impressed by like I was thinking of the mass shooting in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And where the church decided to forgive the shooter.
Right.
I thought that forgiveness was premature.
Yeah.
Because it sends the wrong message, not only to the wrongdoer, but to the whole society of witnesses.
Yeah.
That somehow or other it's the forgiveness, but virtually trying to say, you don't, this person doesn't have to be held accountable.
Right.
This person doesn't have to receive any punishment.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with it. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's another illustration of the
Yeah.
complexity.
Yeah.
Thank you
Definitely.
for opening this up.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's-
I completely agree. Yeah, with everything that you said. And I think that's why it's also important to talk about what forgiveness isn't. Like um, it isn't tolerating or enabling somebody to continue their behavior. It is not staying in something that's unhealthy. It is not continuing a relationship that is unhealthy. It is safety and accountability too. All of that is a part of that process. And when we try and get the easy way out, like just forgive us and we don't have to change, that, you know, gets into the whole systemic issue and all that. So yeah, definitely great points. Mhm.
It is complicated.
Yes.
And I'm so glad in listening, starting with Judy, and then, this discussion is really built. And Judy, as always, was very articulate in what I was thinking about, which is what happens when the person basically does something that's harmful based on what they believe that's not a fact
Mm.
or that hasn't actually occurred. And probably is not looking to be forgiven, but yet
Mm.
as the object of this, you're feeling a lot of hurt. And I experienced that actually as a young child with my mother, and she did have mental issues.
Mm.
But at that point, I didn't realize that.
Mhm.
As I got older, I realized it, and so I was able to, in my mind, forgive her. But this was after, she was gone.
Mm.
But I don't think at the time these things were happening, she was looking for, forgiveness.
Right.
Um, and so there's, as I've gotten older, and this happens sometimes, I have to admit it would never occur to me to forgive a person who does this kind of thing because they believe something that's just not real. And how do you go to somebody and say, I forgive you because you hurt me based on something you believe that's not real?
Mhm. I mean, yeah,
You know,
it's complicated.
yeah, it's very complicated. And so that's when you just, kind of have your talk with God. Because it's just it's not going to do any good to talk to the person, whether you go to the person with one, two, or the whole community. It's just not going to change. And that's the thing that I was thinking about when you were kind of talking about it. And as I said, I was like, oh, I explained this. And then Judy opened her mouth and I said, yeah, that's it. That's good.
No, yeah, it's good. It's really good. A good point. Yeah, and I think that it's true that the person doesn't necessarily have to want it or ask for it or be there or know about it. That there's something in us that helps us, get there. But yeah, it's certainly not easy. And I think in those conversations where reconciliation is possible, it's helpful to talk not about, you know, what you believe or what you think, but more about the impact of that belief can help in some of those instances. But certainly some of those conversations are also never going to happen. Yeah.
I too appreciate what Judy said because I've always struggled with that passage for the same reason. But what you shared about Jesus saying, you need to communicate. You need to, for a community to be a healthy one, you need to communicate. And that helped me understand it in a little different way, as opposed to, because I always thought like people, self-righteous people thinking they know God's will all the time.
Yeah.
You're doing something you shouldn't do, versus the conversations, you've hurt me
Right.
because you said or did something, and seeking restoration. And then if that person didn't hear you, maybe getting some support for you
Right.
in trying to communicate that. Um, so you helped me with that passage, not struggle as much. But I appreciate the conversation since then. And it brought up when I was teaching kids conflict resolution in elementary school, their natural inclination when somebody says, "I'm sorry," is to say, "It's okay." And I go, "No, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
It's not okay. They accidentally pushed you, or they said whatever. I accept your apology, or I forgive you. But don't say it's okay. Is it okay? Do you want them to do it again?"
Yeah.
No, but so I think part of it's cultural
Yeah.
or society, is that we don't want to make somebody uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I also, my own experience, I would never want somebody to tell me I have to forgive somebody. But my own experience is forgiveness is for me. In fact, it's not ever for the other person.
Mm. Mhm.
And I've forgiven lots of family members who never would think they did anything wrong,
Right. Right.
but they've hurt me.
Yeah. Oh my.
And and for me to be able to let go
Yeah.
and move forward, and to focus
Yes.
on God's love and spirit,
Mhm.
and not be stuck in the pain.
Yeah.
That's what forgiveness is meant to me. And that's where the abundance, when you say 7 times 7, is like, no, it can never end.
Mhm.
Because like you started out, we're imperfect and we're going to hurt each other. And Jesus is like, this is going to happen. So how can we move past, how can we move past the hurt that we're inevitably going to cause to each other, and pain and trauma? Um, and but I totally agree with both Jaden and Theo about the nature of forgiveness being used as a weapon,
Mhm.
or somebody saying you have to forgive or you're never going to feel better. Um, but see, I don't characterize what you were saying as forgiveness. I mean, gaslighting to me is not forgiveness.
Yeah.
If you forgive, then you're holding somebody accountable, and you're not saying that what they did was okay.
Right.
Because if it was, then there wouldn't be no reason to forgive in the first place.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
You're preaching. That's good. You can stand up here and that was great. No, I mean, I think that was beautiful and thorough, and I think true. This idea that forgiveness is not actually for the other person, I think is a good one. Just the fact that certain pains and resentments get stuck. They get stuck and they hurt us more than anybody else. And so just releasing that can be a lifelong process, but a beautiful one to let go. And I think your point too about the cultural part is really, really important. I think we're a culture that um, I don't think it's that we don't say sorry. I think it's that we say it too often that it doesn't mean anything. We're taught to kind of over apologize and over say things. I'm in a spiritual discipline to not apologize when you don't need to, right? Like, so that it doesn't lose its meaning, or figure out what it is that you're actually trying to say, you know? I think that, yeah, it's just one of those things that's just become so like, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to say sorry. And especially those of us who are marginalized in any way, are even more likely to over apologize, instead of, did I actually do something? It's a really a spiritual discipline to sort of get that to be what it actually is intended to be, to restore relationship. Mm. So I think those are great points and good to teach kids and adults. It's not okay. It doesn't have to be okay, right? Like, yeah.
Something that I wanted to add that I felt like would be really beneficial to the conversation we ended up talking a lot about apologies and how they relate to forgiveness. And in my opinion, apologies are made of multiple parts. And so there are word apologies where you go, I'm really sorry, I hurt you, that wasn't okay. And then there is action apologies, which often come as a follow-up to the word apologies, where you then implement, okay, this thing that I did to this person really hurt them. I'm going to reflect on that behavior and I am going to adjust how I act in the future to mitigate future harm and show that I understand the ways that I hurt you and I see this and I'm going to put in the continual effort to not repeatedly make the same mistake again. Because like to me, that's like the root of the difference between a like very genuine apology and the type of apology that you might experience in an abusive situation. Because an abusive person in your life, partner, family member, friend, can go, I'm so sorry, I hurt you, that wasn't okay. But it doesn't really fully fulfill itself as an apology if they go on to repeat it over and over. And so to me, like, I think that's a very like important distinction to think about. And on top of that, with what you're saying about the ability to accidentally over apologize, that is especially heavily prevalent in people who have like a lot of chronic shame and guilt, such as people who have experienced repeated trauma, which is common in people who are marginalized because systemic oppression causes trauma. Who would have guessed? And something that I was once told that I have found very helpful is taking a moment to step back and think about it. Why am I apologizing? Because to me, this feels like a real reason to apologize. Is it I feel bad because I'm taking up a lot of your energy right now, and I feel very selfish and guilty for that. And taking a moment to reframe it as a thank you. Thank you for putting this effort into me. I really appreciated it. And that to me has been such a helpful way to slowly cut down on those compulsive apologies so that the genuine ones you make really last and have the impact. And it also works really helpful when someone does apologize for something small, like someone bumping into you. If you need the quick second phrase back, just saying thank you is like such a helpful way to like show that I understand
That's great.
that had a negative impact, and please don't do it again, so it's not okay. But I see that you realize that wasn't okay, and I appreciate that so much. And you're trying to be polite, and that's very sweet. So you just thank you.
I love that. Those are great. Those are absolutely beautiful, beautiful points. Yeah. Any other? Well, wanted to see if I don't see anything on Zoom pop up. Okay. Well, I appreciate the lively discussion here. This is usually not a Lent passage, but I think that anything that helps us dig a little bit deeper is really good. And so I'm grateful that Sanctified Art had this included, because it is one of those things that gets us to grow and gets us to really dig deep into those teachings of the faith. And so let us continue to be taught by forgiveness and continue to talk about what it means and what it doesn't mean as we grow together. And so we'll move to our next song.